Have you ever stopped to think that we can actually hear silence?
It does seem a little bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Like, how can you hear something that's not there? But that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah.
The world of silence and how our brains perceive it.
It's a fascinating area.
We've got a whole bunch of articles here that look at it from all different sides. Scientific studies, personal stories, even how silence is being used in marketing.
Wow.
We're going to uncover how silence is so much more than just the absence of sound.
Okay.
How it can actually impact our well-being.
Yeah.
And even how it's become like a hot commodity in our super noisy world.
That's really interesting.
So one of the articles starts with this really powerful story.
Okay.
This author walks into her father's hospital room right after he passed away.
Oh.
All the machines were off. Everyone else had left the room.
Right.
And she was just hit by this overwhelming stillness.
Like a heavy, quiet.
And it made her think about all these big questions like life, death, and how we even perceive the world.
You don't often get a chance to contemplate that kind of thing.
And she was wondering, like, if there are no limits to what we can hear, would someone who's deaf suddenly experience sound in the afterlife?
Oh, wow.
Or is there like this universal silence
Right.
that we all encounter when we die?
Makes you think.
So it really gets you thinking about the nature of silence itself.
Definitely.
She even talks about how the energy of sound waves
Yeah.
might not be fundamentally different from the sound of silence.
Okay.
It's like we haven't learned to tune into those more subtle vibrations yet.
I see it.
It's kind of like how we're surrounded by radio waves and Wi-Fi signals,
Right.
and we can't directly perceive those,
Yeah.
but they're still there.
That's a good point.
So maybe silence is just like another frequency
Okay.
that we just haven't figured out how to access consciously.
So there could be a whole world of sound that we're just missing. Fascinating.
And that's where the science comes in.
Right.
Because researchers have actually been using these auditory illusions
Oh, really?
to test how our brains process silence.
Wow.
And what they're finding is like mind-blowing.
I'm intrigued.
So these auditory illusions are basically like little tricks
Okay.
that we can play on our brains to kind of reveal these hidden mechanisms
Right.
behind how we perceive both sound and silence.
Makes sense.
So they've adapted these classic auditory illusions for silence.
Okay.
So there's one called the one is more illusion.
Okay.
And in this one, you hear two short tones
All right.
followed by one longer tone.
Gotcha.
And most people think that single longer tone is actually longer than the two combined.
Even though they're the same length?
Yeah, even though they're actually the same length.
Wow. How does that work?
So it's because our brains naturally break down this continuous input into these separate, distinct events.
Okay.
It's this process called event segmentation.
Mm.
And it's just easier for our brains to grasp one longer event
Right.
than to have to combine two separate ones.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So then they applied this same principle to silence.
Oh, interesting.
So they had people listen to like a busy soundscape, like a train station.
Sure.
And then they inserted these silent gaps.
Okay.
And what they found was people perceived the longer periods of silence as being longer, just like they did with the tones.
Wow. So the illusion worked even with silence.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
So it really suggests that our brains don't just passively register the absence of sound.
Right.
We're actually actively perceiving silence as its own distinct event.
So we're not just hearing the sounds around the silence.
Yeah.
We're hearing the silence itself.
Exactly.
That's pretty wild.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
They also tested another illusion
Okay.
called the oddball illusion.
Right.
So in this one, you're listening to a soundscape with two distinct sounds.
Oh.
Like, let's say, a rumbling engine and like a high-pitched organ.
Okay.
And then one of those sounds just cuts out for 5 silent intervals.
Okay.
The first 4 are the same length,
Okay.
but that 5th one is different.
Gotcha.
And the participants had to judge
Yeah.
whether that 5th silent interval was longer or shorter than the others.
And could they tell?
And they could.
Wow.
The results showed that people could accurately perceive that difference in length.
Even though it was just silence.
Even though it was just silence.
It's incredible.
Really supports the idea that our brains are creating these distinct representations of silence.
Right.
So we can process it just like we process sound.
So silence isn't just a void.
Right.
It's an active part of how we hear things.
It really changes how you think about those quiet moments, right?
It really does.
Like your brain is hard at work,
Yeah.
even when the world seems still.
That's so cool.
And one researcher, Ruiz Gogo,
Okay.
he pointed out that this suggests that our minds are actually constructing these auditory representations
Interesting.
to underpin our experience of silence.
Huh. I like that.
And now we're going to shift gears a bit
Right?
and talk about the physical impact of
The
silence.
physical impact.
Have you ever noticed that feeling of calm
Oh, yeah.
you get after you escape a noisy environment?
Absolutely.
Well, there's a whole lot of science that explains why that
I'd
happens.
love to hear about that.
So first, let's talk about noise pollution.
Okay.
That constant barrage of sound
Right.
we're exposed to in modern life.
Yeah, it never ends.
It's way more than just annoying.
For sure.
It's actually been linked to a bunch of health problems.
Really?
Like stress,
Okay.
sleep disruptions,
That makes sense.
cardiovascular issues,
Wow.
even cognitive impairment.
That's scary.
So it's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah.
How much noise we're constantly bombarded with.
It's true.
And the toll it takes on us.
It's like we're always on edge.
Our bodies are constantly reacting to these sounds. Even if we don't realize it,
Right.
it triggers this physiological stress response,
Uh-huh.
leading to the release of stress hormones like cortisol.
Oh, I see.
And it's not just the loud, jarring noises
Right.
that are the problem.
It's the constant low-level stuff, too.
Yeah, even that low-level background noise,
Makes sense.
it can have a cumulative effect.
Right, like a drip, drip, drip.
Exactly.
Wearing you down.
So how does silence fit into all this?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, it turns out those quiet moments,
Yeah.
they're like an antidote to all that noise.
Okay.
They can actually reverse those negative effects of noise pollution
That's good to know.
and allow our bodies to recover.
So we need those breaks?
Even short periods of silence can have a big impact,
Really?
reducing stress,
Uh,
lowering blood pressure,
oh,
promoting relaxation.
I could definitely use some of that.
It's like hitting the pause button
Right.
on that constant stress response.
That's a great way to put it.
And here's something I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
Studies have shown that silence can be even more relaxing
More relaxing.
than listening to like relaxing music.
Really? That's surprising.
You would think calming music would be the key, right?
Yeah, I would have thought so.
But it seems like silence allows for like a deeper level of relaxation.
Interesting.
So maybe with music,
Yeah.
there's still that external stimulation
Right.
that our brains have to process.
Makes sense.
But silence gives our brains a chance to truly unwind
Uh-huh.
and disconnect from all that external input.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Makes you wonder if all those meditation apps with nature sounds are maybe doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Maybe what our brains really need is true silence.
Could be. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, there's some pretty groundbreaking research
Okay.
that supports this whole idea of the power of silence.
Like what?
One study found that spending just 2 hours a day in silence
2 hours.
can actually promote cell development in the hippocampus,
The hippocampus. Wow.
which is that part of the brain
Yeah.
responsible for memory and learning.
That's amazing.
So it's not just about relaxing.
Right.
Silence could actually be boosting our brain power.
So silence is like a brain workout.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
That something so simple
Mm-hmm.
could have such a big impact on our brains.
Really makes you think.
And this brings us to another question.
Okay.
What's going on in our brains when there's no external sound?
Right?
Is it truly silent in there?
Good question.
You might be surprised to hear that it's not.
Oh, really?
Our brains are actually pretty chatty,
Even when it's quiet outside.
even when the outside world's quiet.
So, like, what's happening?
So even when we're not actively listening to anything,
Mm-hmm.
our brains can generate these internal representations of sound.
So, like, our brains are making their own sounds.
It's kind of like our brains have their own built-in sound system
Oh,
that can play back memories,
okay.
create these whole imaginary soundscape.
I like that.
Like when you're reading a book
Yeah.
and you can almost hear the characters' voices.
Right.
Or when you get a song stuck in your head,
Oh, all the time.
even though you haven't heard it playing anywhere.
That's a good example.
It's pretty amazing
Yeah.
how our brains can simulate these sensory experiences.
Totally.
It can draw on past experiences,
Mm.
stored information
Uh,
to create this rich inner world of sound,
wow.
even when there's nothing coming in from the outside.
So it's not just random noise then?
No, it's not random at all.
What is it then?
It actually plays a huge role in how we understand ourselves
Oh,
and the
okay.
world around us.
How so?
There's this thing called the brain's default mode network,
Default mode network.
which becomes most active when we're not focused on a specific task.
Interesting.
So think of it like the conductor of your brain's orchestra.
Okay, I can see that.
It guides our thoughts, memories, emotions
Mm-hmm.
when we're not actively engaged in something else.
So it's running in the background.
It's
I like
involved
that.
in self-reflection,
Right.
daydreaming,
Mm-hmm.
making sense of our experiences.
It's like the meaning-making part of our brains.
It helps us integrate our past with our present
Yeah.
and project ourselves into the future.
That's a lot of responsibility.
And here's the connection to silence.
Okay, I'm listening.
Silence actually seems to boost the activity of this default mode network.
So when we're quiet, our brains go into overdrive.
Not overdrive exactly, but it's like when we're not bombarded with all that external stimulation,
Right.
our brains have more space to wander,
Yeah.
to make connections,
Mm-hmm.
to engage in these deeper levels of processing.
Like it can finally breathe.
It's like silence gives our brains permission to think outside the box,
I like that.
explore new ideas,
Uh-huh.
come up with creative solutions.
That makes sense.
It allows for this kind of mental fermentation
Okay.
where ideas can bubble up
Right.
and new connections can be forged.
So that's where those aha moments come from.
Exactly.
That's cool.
So it's not just about zoning out.
Right.
These moments of quiet reflection,
Yeah.
they're actually essential
Oh.
for our cognitive and emotional well-being.
It's like recharging your batteries.
They allow us to process information,
Mm-hmm.
consolidate memories,
Mm-hmm.
make meaning of our experiences.
Just like putting all the pieces together.
It's in these quiet moments of contemplation
Yeah.
that we often connect with our deepest selves
Right.
and gain a clearer understanding of our place in the world.
Powerful stuff.
This whole conversation
Yeah.
has really shifted my perspective on silence.
Me too.
I never realized it was such an active and essential
Right.
part of our mental landscape.
It is pretty mind-blowing.
And speaking of shifting perspectives,
Okay.
who would have thought that silence could be marketed as a commodity?
Seriously.
It sounds kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, how do you sell silence?
But it's actually happening,
Real.
and it's brilliant.
I'm intrigued.
So Finland, known for its beautiful, tranquil landscapes,
Yeah, beautiful country.
they've actually incorporated silence into their national branding.
That's interesting.
They launched this whole campaign
What's it called?
called Silence, Please,
Silence, please. I love it.
showcasing the serenity of Finnish nature,
Okay.
inviting people to come experience it firsthand.
So they're selling peace and quiet.
It's a clever strategy.
Yeah.
It taps into this growing desire
Right.
for peace and quiet
Yeah.
in our increasingly noisy and hectic world.
We all need a break sometimes.
It's like they're selling an escape
Yeah.
from all the constant stimulation and demands of modern life.
That's a great way to
A
put it.
chance to reconnect with nature
Uh,
and, more importantly, with oneself.
I like that.
And it's working.
Really?
The campaign has gotten a ton of international attention,
Wow.
which just goes to show how much we all crave break from the noise.
It's true.
Makes you wonder if we're starting to recognize silence
Yeah.
as a precious resource.
Something that needs to be protected and cherished, like clean air or water.
Exactly.
That's a great analogy.
In a world that constantly pushes us
Right.
to be more productive,
Yeah.
more connected,
We're stimulated.
it's easy to forget the power of simply being.
It's true.
And silence allows us to step back from all that noise
Mm-hmm.
and reconnect with what really matters.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that sometimes the most powerful experiences can come from quieting our minds and just being open to the stillness.
And those experiences can change you. They can make you more self-aware, more creative, and more connected to everything around you.
This deep dive has really changed how I think about silence.
Yeah, me too. It's amazing how something that seems so empty can be so full of possibilities.
It makes me think, if our brains are actively making these representations of silence, what does that even say about reality? Is silence really empty, or is it just filled with stuff we can't even imagine yet?
That's a big question. Philosophers and scientists have been trying to figure that out forever.
Right.
Maybe the real power of silence isn't that it's empty, but that it can make us use our imaginations and see the world in new ways.
Like silence is this blank canvas, and we get to fill it in with our thoughts and dreams.
Exactly. It's a place where we can connect with ourselves and really become aware.
Well, I think this has given us all a lot to think about.
Yeah, I hope so.
What will you discover in the silence? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the sound of silence. Until next time, keep exploring.